Welcome everybody, a warm welcome and thank you all for joining us today at the festive event of the inauguration of Dr. Jan van Boeckel as Professor of Art and Sustainability at the Research Center Art and Society here at Hanze University of Applied Sciences. We are very happy to welcome you all, and especially our guest speakers today, Andri Snær Magnason will join us from Iceland, Loes Damhof from Hanze University of Applied Sciences, and Ina Horlings from the University of Groningen. Before the official inauguration lecture, we will hold a seminar in which the guest speakers will comment on Jan's vision for the lectoraat in relation to the challenges of our shared world and the necessity to radically change our approach in relation to our natural environment, and specifically what role art can play in this journey in transition to a sustainable future. My name is Judith van der Elst, your host this afternoon, and in collaboration with Jan, I will work towards the goals set forth by Jan in my role as postdoctoral researcher at Art and Sustainability. And I come to Hanze from a research career covering anthropological, archaeological, and spatial science, and as well as a practice covering art science projects and organic farming. So before we start the official program, a few practical rules. We will have some time for questions later on at the end of all the speakers. But we ask you to post your questions in the chat, and we will do our best to address these all. And please keep your microphones muted at all times. Without further ado, I will introduce our guest speakers now and briefly give the word to Jan after that to open the session. So briefly, Andri Snær Magnason will present his talk in response to Jan's vision, and then afterward, Loes and Ina will respond to Andri's. So Dr. Ina Horlings holds a chair in Socio-spatial planning at the Faculty of Spatial Sciences of the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. Her research work broadly deals with the human factor in spatial planning. Her expertise and interests cover the topics such as place-based development, sense of place, and sustainable spatial development. She participated in a number of EU projects such as Sustainable Place Shaping, and currently she is member of the Research Committee of the Regional Studies Association and the research network The Place of Leadership in Urban and Regional Development. She has edited several books on passion, vital coalitions, leadership, and the role of culture in regional development. Loes Damhof has been an innovator and pioneer in higher education for most of her adult life. Elected Lecturer of the Year 2016 of all higher education in the Netherlands for her innovative practices and passion for teaching. She designs and facilitates learning spaces for students of all ages. In collaboration with UNESCO, she used her Comenius Award for implementing futures literacy, the capability to use the future to rethink the present, as the essential competency for the next decade in higher education. In 2018, Loes and her team at Hanze got rewarded with the UNESCO Chair on Futures Literacy for their work on researching the impact of future literacy and the design principles of future literacy interventions. In addition to her research and teaching practices, she designs, develops, and facilitates so-called future literacy labs, collective intelligence knowledge creation processes across the globe that challenge and raise fundamental questions on leadership, migration, climate change, and technology. So both Ina and Loes will comment on Andri, on our first and keynote speaker of this afternoon, Andri Magnason, who is an Icelandic writer and documentary filmmaker. Andri's work has been published or performed in more than 40 countries, and to list all of his impressive achievements is beyond our time today. But here I will mention his newest book entitled On Time and Water. It was a national bestseller in Iceland in 2019 and will be translated to more than 30 languages. on Time and Water is shortlisted for the Nordic Council's Literary Prize of 2021. Furthermore, Andri has collaborated with various artists in the fields of activism, science, architecture, visual art, music, theater, and documentary film. Andri has been active in the fight against the destruction of the Icelandic highlands. His book, Dreamland, a self-help manual for a frightened nation, takes on these issues, and it has since become a feature-length documentary film. His text for the memorial of Ok Glacier became widely read around the world. In addition, Andri ran for president of Iceland in 2016 with environmental issues on his agenda, and he came in third. So all the guests will join us today in support of the celebration of the inauguration of Dr. Jan van Boeckel, who will present his inaugural lecture this afternoon after the seminar at 4 o'clock. So Dr. Jan van Boeckel started his career as a cultural anthropologist, but as artist educator increasingly focused on his own artistic practice and on the pedagogy of art education. He has ample experience in research projects on the cutting edge of art and sustainability. And in 2013, he received his Doctor of Arts in Arts Education at Aalto University, Helsinki. In the past years, he has been working in several northern countries, among which Iceland, Sweden, and Finland. We are looking forward to hearing his vision for the future later this afternoon. And here at Hanze and beyond. And with that, I will give the word to Jan to open the seminar.
Thank you. Introduction to the program today. I'm very excited to sit here on this table with you and with Loes and with Ina. And to have as a special guest from Iceland, the country of the volcanic eruption at the moment, Andri Snær Magnason. And in 2015, when I was teaching there, we had a short meeting in the city of Reykjavik. And also we met at the Climate Existence Conference in Sweden. So I'm honored and excited to hear what you will share today with us in response to this event of my inauguration as a professor in art and sustainability.
Thank you. Am I online? And you can see my slides. Okay, super. So it's a great honor to be here today and meet you virtually, hopefully someday in the real life. So the question is, what does it mean to be a professor of arts today, and how is that different from other periods in the last maybe 100 years or 20 years or 50 years? You could say that the words that he chooses, Dr. Jan, soul, soil, and society, are in a way things that have been neglected in the academia in the recent years. We have been rational, we have been calculated, we have been cool, we have been slick. But if anyone has dared to go into soul, soil, and society, or these maybe more vulnerable issues, that has been considered unmeasurable and maybe softer science. But in a way, it seems like we have found out in the recent years that that rationality has failed us. And it seems like we are now desperately seeking a new language to move forward into the next century. I have a favorite quote by Baba Diom. In the end, we will conserve only what we love. We will love only what we understand. And we will understand only what we are taught. And what I like about this is it's about teaching, but it's also about understanding, and it's also about love. But in most scientific papers in the last 100 years, scientists have been trained not to use words like love or words like soul. There are things that previous generations could not teach us. I am using in my book my grandparents as a measurement of time. They were founding partners of the Icelandic Glacial Research Society, and they were traveling the glaciers in the 50s when the glaciers seemed eternal. They were navigating and mapping these places that had been previously untraveled and unnamed. These were great expanses of ice, 1,000 meters thick, symbols of eternity, like the ocean, like the rocks, like the clouds and the sky, just all these constants that we have around us in nature. These elements were considered eternal. So these pioneering trips were epic and kind of part of my family mythology, but only in the context of traveling and maybe in the context of science and exploration. But now, after 70 years of measuring the glaciers, we can see how the glaciers will react to the change of climate and how the major glaciers of Iceland are vanishing in the next 100 years. So these are the two glaciers, Hofsjökull and Langjökull, and according to current temperatures, not rising temperatures, these glaciers are vanishing at an alarming speed. So what does this mean? Well, this means that humans are confronted with something that we never imagined before. That is, we did not expect that we could harm glaciers. Yes, we did expect that we could accomplish things, we could build cities and empires, but I think we never imagined that the consequences could be the vanishing of entities that we always thought were much bigger than any human force. So when you see a graph like this, it means, and because this was unintended, this means that we should be in a paradigm shift, because this is very serious. This is very serious for the Netherlands, of course, and all low-lying areas in the world, because these are not only the Icelandic glaciers, these are all the glaciers of the world. And this means that the 20th century was almost totally miscalculated. But we have cultural problems that we do not connect ourselves to dates like, I'm very sorry, my PowerPoint just crashed. I will open it again. Of course, it crashes when you need it the most. So I'm just reopening. So the wonders of technology are failing me now. So I will just redo my. Can you see me now again? If you give me the.
You need to switch again, Andri.
Switch place again. Yeah. Okay. Now you should see me. So this was not intended, and for some strange reason, alarming information like this has not caused the paradigm shift that we have wanted. It has not caused the society to pull the emergency brake like Greta Thunberg has been calling for. And basically, of course, we have been discussing, we have been doing things, but basically we have not seen the real shift, or that it does not seem like people actually understand what is happening. This has very much to do with time. Our generation, my generation, Jan's generation, and I think most of the people that are in the room here, we saw the year 2000 as the future. That is, I was raised with the year 2000 as a utopian future date. Culturally, that was how we saw the future. 2000 was the future. Now it is 2020, and strangely, the same generation has been the ruling power of our cultures and politics, and the future has not been updated. So dates like 2160 seem to be irrelevant to us. So when a scientist says 2160, we just shrug. It doesn't really matter to us. So, but a student that is now studying with Jan, that is born the year 2000, if that person becomes as old as my grandmother in the year 2090, that person might have a favorite 20-year-old in his life. If that 20-year-old becomes 90, then that means that a student that is now studying with Jan will know a person that will still be alive in the year 2160. And that seems like sci-fi, but it's actually not irrelevant. But the problem is that we are not currently behaving on our planet like we expect that generation to live in some kind of stability or in a world that is in balance. Ólafur Elíasson, artist, he created this series here in the year 1999. At the time, my son was 2 years old. This is his glacial series. And by coincidence, my son was helping him in the summer of 2019 to remake the series. So only in the life of my son, that is 23 years old, the glaciers of Iceland have changed like this. This is a change that normally should take 300 years in geological history, but this is happening not in a lifetime of the oldest persons, but in the lifetime of the youngest people. So I had this strange opportunity to write a eulogy for a lost glacier. And a single human being should not be able to see a glacier melt, but this might be the first eulogy of maybe 200 that a single generation might have to write. So I wrote, Ok is the first Icelandic glacier to be lost to climate change. In the next 200 years, all our glaciers are expected to follow the same path. This monument is to acknowledge that we know what is happening and what needs to be done. Only you know if we did it. It seems like only this information should be alarming enough. But then we have more information, like this one here, and terms that are almost totally new to us and actually never entered the primary education of most people in ruling that have ruling power today. So ocean acidification is a term that was first coined in the year 2003. It was first mentioned in Iceland in 2006 in newspapers, and it was only once mentioned in 2006. It was twice mentioned 2000. It was once mentioned in 2007. It was never mentioned in 2008, and twice mentioned in 2009. So, of course, if something like that, a word like this is mentioned 4 times until 10 years ago, you would think it might be a minor thing. But ocean acidification is about the fact that about 30% of the world's emissions end in the oceans. And that means that the ocean's pH level will drop in the next 80 years more than it has in the previous 50 million years. And again, we're dealing with figures that are difficult to grasp. 0.3 is very little. It's an extremely small number, and always in our lives we have felt 0.3 to be minuscule, to be irrelevant. 0.3 million, 0.3 Celsius, 0.3 unemployment. 0.3 is always small, but then 50 million is just, in years, is just too much. But how can we grasp that a single human being, that is, a single student of Jan, will experience a greater change in the oceans than not all generations of man until now, but 10 times all the generations of man. So, because humans are believed to be 5 million years old, so we're talking about a 10 times longer time than the whole evolution of man. How can one single human being experience this? And how can we talk about something on that scale that is bigger than language? And that is a big challenge of art, is how to translate this scientific data into emotions, into understanding, into verbal language, into visual language, into a paradigm, because paradigm shifts, they don't happen because you see a graph. They happen because new understanding is filtered through culture. And what we will see, and what is happening exactly now, is that we are on this paradigm shift. That is, we are coming out of the paradigm of the 20th century, the paradigm of capitalism and communism and industrialism, into a void where we actually don't really know what language we can use when we have seen the consequences that are greater than possibly, that are so great that they are on a geological scale. So what we are witnessing now is change that is a paradigm shift. And that means that the students of today, they are experiencing things that are greater than any previous generation has seen before. We have seen headlines of global warming and glacial melt and all these great events, but it seems like they have not hit home. It seems like what has been considered rational in infrastructure and design, that is the combined excellence of our universities, the combined excellence of our educational system, the combined excellence of our infrastructure, our legislation, our just the combined excellence of humans. When that all comes together, it does not seem to be more excellent than an algae bloom. That is, we're just growing, it seems like we're growing into a resource just to be able to collapse again. So the combined excellence of humans is an Earth that is going completely out of balance. And this will upend things. This upends language. This upends what is considered rational. And this puts a question to almost all our actions and activities, because we never intended this to be happening. And this also goes to issues like global warming, where we see that human emissions have reached more than 35 gigatons per year. And in the next 30 years, we have to reduce emissions to zero, and we have to go to negative from there. So the generation that is now entering universities, they are entering a completely different paradigm than my generation. I could just decide what I wanted to be, and I could just want to climb the food chain of industry or success. And I would win if I had the greatest carbon emissions, if I had the biggest car and the biggest house, and I could travel the most. But the generation that is now going into university has this challenge ahead of it, and that means the next 30 years, all emissions have to reduce to zero. And that means that the whole working life of a student that is born today is about this challenge. That is, and this is, if you become a designer, it means you have to redesign almost everything. If you become an engineer, You have to redesign transportation. If you become a farmer, you have to redesign and rethink how we farm things. So the generation that is now in the universities is not asked what you want to become, but what you need to become. But on the other hand, they're also with this overwhelming gloom because we don't really know if this is possible. Some scientists believe it's possible, it's theoretically possible, but the outcome of this will be fundamentally deep in our culture. Because if we reach the climate goal of 1.5 instead of 2 degrees, then we will see the decline of coral reefs by 70 to 90% instead of them all virtually disappearing. And it seems like in the last 20 years, we have totally neglected the warning signs that have been around us. And we could also see consequences, cultural consequences of blame against the current generation that should have seen this. So we're seeing consequences like birth strikes, that is young people deciding not to have children because they believe more humans will be harmful to nature. But if you are so radical as having a birth strike, you could also strike against the older generation that should have seen the warning signs, which is my generation, our generation, the generation of teachers. So we could see all sorts of cultural consequences. There is progress in many fields, but we could also see consequences of blame, of revolt against the older generation. Because when I thought that I should want us to keep us within 2 degrees of global warming, I do not recall any headlines that told me that I wanted all the coral reefs to be gone. And when this information was obvious, we did not really know that this was happening. Paradigm shifts, they normally happen when they don't happen with an older generation changing its mind. It happens when the younger generation comes in that is normally born around the time when the information was created or the new scientific paradigm was created. So it actually fits now that the generation entering universities is the generation that was born when the word ocean acidification was created. So the next 30 years will be completely different from the last 30 years. Ideas that we have taken for granted will not be taken for granted. This generation that lived through both the coronavirus and the draconian situation this generation that both had the climate strikes and the draconian situation of measures against the coronavirus. This generation is going to rethink, recalculate, redefine almost everything. So yes, they will probably make accomplishments in making windmills and all sorts of things, but culturally we can expect more dramatic change than we've seen in the last 50 years, and hashtags like Me Too, which will be addressed against industries and habits that this generation has calculated will be totally harmful for their future. So we can be optimistic, pessimistic. We can only know that information, fundamental information like this, will cause disruption not only in nature, but also culturally, politically, economically, almost every single field when this seeps in and becomes a new understanding. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. That was exactly on time. Yes, so thank you for outlining the challenges that Jan will have to address in his lectoraat. And with that, I will give the word to Loes to respond to these fantastic words. And
Thank you, Judith, and thank you, Andri, for your inspiring lecture, I think, but thought-provoking. Yes, when my name is Loes, and when Jan asked me to join this panel or give a response, I dove into his paper and, of course, in the work of Andri, and I said to him, it's a little bit of a pity that we're all kind of like-minded spirits, but then he said, actually, it's a good thing, because then we can reinforce our ideas. And I thought, this is actually kind of nice, this migration of ideas that we kind of travel together and become stronger for it. And can we start my PowerPoint slide now? I don't see, and then maybe if this migration of ideas becomes a murmuration of ideas, and then maybe they take even a whole new shape altogether. So I'm one of those birds, I suppose, one of those ideas, and I approach the present and make sense of the world through futures thinking. I have a chair in futures literacy, and for those who don't know what it is a capability, a skill, a competency for imagining multiple and diverse futures, and using those futures as lenses through which we can look at the present anew. So we're using futures to rethink what we are doing today, how we think and how we behave in the present. And since it is a capability, it can be taught. So the value of teaching is incredibly important. Futures literacy, well, the future does not exist. So every time we think about the future, we do this based on assumptions. And often, especially listening to Andri, there was a lot of predictions and future scenarios about the future. And when we use futures, we do this often based on planning and preparation. But as we know now, that's not enough, because you cannot plan or prepare your way out of everything. The world is not everything. The future is not always predictable or plannable. And sometimes we follow certain predictions. We extrapolate knowledge from the present to the future. We see a certain scenario and then we follow. And because we've planned it, we have this false sense of security that somehow we're just following what we've come to understand. But there's a different element to it, and that is the spontaneity, emergence, and the fact that everything is always changing. So future literacy is a competency, and it's really important in higher education, but not just for students. It's for all of us. It is important because we need to relate ourselves different. I apologize, get a little bit too fast. And when I was reading, as Jan will introduce in his paper this afternoon, this project called Earthbound, sorry for the spoiler, I was inspired, I remember by the book by Octavia Butler, one of the first female black sci-fi writers, and the story, The Parable of the Sower, is about a girl. It takes place in dystopian Los Angeles in 2025, and she starts a new religion called Earthseed. And the religion is not about a god or a person. The religion is change. And she says we need to embrace, not put it on a pedestal per se, but just really integrate it in our lives. And all that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change. It's the only constant in our lives. So instead of focusing only on planning and preparing for the future, we need to teach ourselves and our students how do we relate to change, to the changing nature of things. And that is not an easy feat to do. Technology fails. There you go. So taking Jan's and also Andri's title of his presentation, Soil, Soul and Society. Soil, when we imagine multiple futures, we tend to notice different things in the present. And that means that just because we've been to different multiple futures, you tend to notice just being a little bit more open towards emergence. You see different things. You sense more, but things also make more sense, just because you stretch your own imagination. That's why it's so important to what we call overcome the poverty of imagination. It is really important to be able to imagine multiple futures and not just that one scenario. And maybe some of you have noticed it when you're during Corona time that all of a sudden you notice there are so many more birds or different flowers or there's fungi or we marvel at how trees communicate or how fungi communicate and what we can learn from them. Those are all different trends that we sense now. They make more sense to us because we are more open towards them. The second one was mentioned, soul. Andri was talking about the importance of love and understanding and teaching. And if we imagine multiple futures, if we stretch that imagination, thinking about, dreaming about the most desirable futures, it's not just only for the purpose how to get there, but also to understand what we love the most, what is most dear to us, and what are our strongest values. That is a really important feature of futures literacy. What do you hold dear? What is important to you? And since the future does not exist, only in our imagination, we cannot know what future generations will care about. We just can't. We don't know what they will love. We don't know what they would find important. So as Real Miller, who's the founder of Future Literacy, would say, we demonstrate our love for future generations by living by our values in the present. And the last one is society. When we imagine multiple futures, we need different perspectives about the future. We need as many different future visions as we can, so we can stretch that imagination. But we need more than just including people, which means inviting different voices to the table. We need to reconstruct the table altogether. Inclusion is about inviting other voices to your project, to your table. But we need to go beyond that. We need to co-create new stories, new narratives together. And that we need to co-create places where everybody belongs. Because right now, if we follow certain scenarios that are thought by certain people, we tend to colonize the future. And I think we should move towards a place where we create futures that belong to everybody. So I mentioned a couple of times when we imagine multiple futures. We do this by sharing future images, but what is often missing is that we're focusing too much on language, and we need the arts more than anything else to be able to overcome the poverty of imagination. And the other thing that I want to end with is that when we talk about futures, we want to do something for the future, but it's very much about the present as well. The future does not exist, but when we imagine the future, we always do this based on assumptions. And when we become aware of them, we can see different things in the present. And we can stay with the trouble, to quote Donna Haraway, stay with the cracks, see different things in the present. And to quote my friend Bayo Kamalafe, sometimes it's just better to not go forward, but to go awkward. Thank you very much. This was my speech and my email address. And then hopefully the future is lit.
Thank you, Loes, for your presentation and also for forcing us to think about the future in a different way. And with that, I will give the word to Ina Horlings, who will now give her presentation.
Thanks very much for the invitation today. My name is Ina Horlings, and I think this is a day of celebration. And I congratulate Jan van Boeckel with his new position as lector on art and sustainability. My reflection is on the speech of Jan van Boeckel, which he will give this afternoon. But I would like to warn the audience that this will not be a joyful message. The key point I want to make is that in the light of the current climate emergency, as you see on this slide, not just a societal transformation towards sustainability is needed, but also inner change. Jan van Boeckel and also Andri reflected on this inner change via the term the soul dimension of sustainability. I think artistic expressions can support such inner change. So the inaugural lecture Jan van Boeckel will give today is entitled, I Will Still Plant My Apple Tree. You can see here the apple tree on the slide. He refers to our unsustainable society and to the climate crisis, the biggest challenge of our time. The metaphor of the apple tree suggests hope. It is also a metaphor for the wish we all have to leave something behind, a legacy beyond our lifetime. But is it still useful to act, to plant trees? Is there still hope? Can we find a place to land, as Latour phrased it? I must admit that if we look at climate science, I question this. Even if we include the recent plans of the European Union and the American president, we are still heading towards disaster and catastrophe. The threats of climate change are the direct results of our unsustainable way of living. As Jan would phrase it, we don't take care of our soil. And of course, that resonates very much with me as I'm a farmer's daughter. And I'm still very much also involved in gardening. Our planet Earth is a system, and its stability is dependent on mechanisms that influence each other. And Andri already mentioned some of these mechanisms. The Atlantic circulation, the ocean acidification, the melting of the glaciers, and also the dieback of the Amazon. Many of these mechanisms have now reached a tipping point. You can see the tipping point here on the slide. Beyond 1.5 degrees temperature rise, biophysical feedbacks create a situation beyond human control, called runaway climate change. And we are now heading towards 3 degrees in 2100, which is an unlivable situation, including extreme heat, droughts, and flooding. And this will limit the range of potential future trajectories, introducing the possibility of a hothouse Earth scenario, as Will Steven called it. The graph on this slide shows our attempts to come to joint agreements in cutting back CO2 emissions, which, however, don't keep up with the fast increasing CO2 in the atmosphere. So the fact that we must stop emitting more and even remove a lot of it is an even simple as unavoidable conclusion. How do scientists deal with this issue? They used to work based on the rational mind, as Andri said. But now some of them have come to understand that emotions and feelings also play an important role. In April, I read a very disturbing article of 3 senior climate scientists who explain how they have dealt with this. Collectively, these 3 scientists have spent more than 80 years thinking about this issue. And they explained how since the message of Al Gore, The Inconvenient Truth, in the 80s of the last century, international debates started to center around the idea of creating net zero emissions. And this means we should cut back on emissions, of course, but also take carbon out of the atmosphere via capture and storage. And we call this negative CO2 emissions. And this idea has been already included in all kinds of economic climate prediction models and in policy agreements. So we have already included them, but they are not there yet. In 2009, it became clear that such technology not yet exists, and it cannot provide the gradual reductions that policymakers demand. The scientists now admit we cannot live up to the promise. It is an illusion. And in terms of mitigation, we have already run out of time. So I probably am even more pessimistic than Andri. This figure shows how fast mitigation has to happen. Such steep mitigation is not possible. James Dyke, one of the 3 scientists from this article, he's from Exeter, he said, over the years, doubt has developed into threat. This gnawing sense that we have made a terrible mistake. There are now times we freely admit to a sense of panic even. How did we get this so wrong? What are our children supposed to think about how we have acted? And this brings me to the second point, acting beyond hope. The information deficit model assumes that more knowledge will lead to action. So if we have the facts, we will act. However, people are often more responsive to stories, emotions, and images than to facts and cognition. The poem in the next slide, one moment, yeah, here it is, addresses a feeling of unpredictability and illustrates that in the end, it's our connectedness to others, Loes already mentioned it, that matters. Our attachment, all can vanish in an instant. They will vanish from us sooner than later anyway. But abrupt insult is another manner. Outrage and grief become the new reality. Use it to alter habits and create new norms. Extract purpose. Be intransigent about your new norms rather than merely being disobedient. Live a life that others will accommodate just to have your company. Be good company. Climate emergency can create feelings of hope, but also hopelessness. But how then to communicate this to our students, as the previous speakers already said? What if it's too late to act in the face of an unavoidable societal collapse? I personally feel that I have a moral duty to communicate and act beyond hope. Hope is something which is beyond our control. In fact, it's very passive. You hope, for example, that the weather will be nice or that your plane won't crash. But it makes more sense to act inspired by love. Loes already mentioned it. Directed to what you care about and be meaningful towards your loved ones and nature. This can provide a feeling of gratitude even in the midst of environmental melancholia, and it can prevent polarizations and conflicts between communities. Jan van Boeckel will also talk about this in this lecture later this afternoon, so this is a bit of a teaser. He refers to joyful sorrow or mindful schizophrenia, as we have to deal with our ambivalent emotions. And this brings me to the need for inner change. The Sufi philosopher and poet Rumi mentioned already in the 13th century, yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I'm wise, so I'm changing myself. Transformation requires not just practical and political actions, but also personal change, or change from the inside out, which is visualized in this picture from Karen O'Brien. The circle, a picture. The personal sphere represents changes in meaning-making, which includes the individual and our shared beliefs, or values, or worldviews, and paradigms that shape our attitudes, actions, and perceived options. It also acknowledges the importance of social consciousness in transformation processes. The other figure of the iceberg shows that we tend to focus on what we see above water, the things we see in the world, our behavior, the structures we build, the cities we make, the places we inhabit, and organizations. The part underwater, the personal dimension, is less visible, but equally important. Here my last point comes in, the role of art, as artistic expressions might help us in different ways. When we talk about our opinions, this might appear as being on the top of two different icebergs, and polarization and conflicts might occur. However, if you dive underwater, we might see it's actually one iceberg. As arts can be an expression of our values, it can help to bridge opinions by finding a common ground rooted in joint universal values such as compassion, solidarity, and justice. A creative mapping of our values brings to the surface what we consider important. Art appeals to what we care about. Second, artistic representations can provide entry points for a reflection. How we have organized our society and how our actions influence the planet and ourselves. Art can also help us imagine new futures beyond our cognitive mind and visualize not just what it is, but also what should be or what could be. Think of films that portray utopias or even dystopias. Art can also shift our mindsets. What if we would think not just as humans, but from the perspective of nature or a single animal? What if we would creatively imagine ourselves to be a landscape or a river? You see here a picture of a workshop where I imagined myself to be an owl. The perspective of nature might stimulate us to reflect from a non-human and also a more longer-term perspective. A sense of connectedness or relatability to life itself, as John already mentioned, can change our values, feelings, as well as our actions. Lastly, art can touch our heart, perhaps, or maybe probably, more than any scientific publication can do. We live in a world of wounds, and this is expressed in the last poem of Rumi, which I will read to end this reflection. And I think this poem really also reflects some of the key messages which will Jan elaborate this afternoon. Beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. The wound is the place where the light enters you. Only from the heart you can touch the sky. Thank you.
Thank you, Ina, and thank you all the speakers for your thought-provoking ideas. And it seems that imagination is a really important topic today. Andri, are you also here with us still?
Can you see me?
Yay! So let me be advocate of the devil. Why should I care about your, glacier in Iceland? How is it going to spur me into action? So I want to ask you a brief question. What do you think will actually make people change their behavior?
Yeah, that's a big question, because people's behavior has not changed very much in the last 20 years. I still believe that information and storytelling will eventually bring us to the right place. I think we are, I think in terms of paradigm shifts, maybe these 20 years are understandable if we look at human rights, women's rights, democracy, how Copernicus, it took 100 years for his theory to be understood. But the problem is that we don't have 100 years now. And I do think that the young generation that is coming in now, they will force us into the paradigm shift much faster than we ever predicted. They will, because they are looking at 2070, while we were planning to play golf in Spain in our 70s, they are just seeing our Earth just going down the drain. So they will not be able to be apathetic against this. Some will, but I think they will take this really seriously, like not in an abstract way like we do. Think of your children. It's basically just, okay, I'm paying into a pension fund to be paid 2070. What's happening 2070? What am I going to buy for that money?
So can I ask the other speakers to respond? Loes?
Sure. I agree that the next generation has a much more daunting task ahead of them. At the same time, if we are betting on the next generation, I think we're making a big mistake. I think it's also up to us to change and to start. And I think that this is very, very complex. And I think Andri is right, just graphs and numbers are not going to shock anybody into anything. In order to really rethink and question structures and systems and how we've been doing things, I think we need to ask ourselves some really inconvenient questions, which is, what are we actually trying to save? Are we saving the planet? Are we saving our lifestyle? Are we saving humanity? are we saving nature, and why do we see nature as different from humanity? So I think those are fundamental questions that we need to start talking about and start a dialogue. And paradigm shift, there's a lot of change happening in not doing something. That sounds contradictory, or to slowing down, especially in times of urgency. But if we think, that I know for sure, if we think that we can innovate our way out of this, and we can just act and just come up with, because we feel this sense of urgency. If we do not if we do not stop colonizing the future, if we do not stop, if we don't start deconstructing these narratives, we're going to end up making the same mistakes again. And then how we respond to the problem will become part of the problem. That I know. That I think I know. Yeah.
Thank you, Loes. Ina, do you want to?
Yeah, my niece, who is 22, she once said she studied future planning studies, and she said, yeah, we have to solve the mess you created. And in fact, that's true. And that is a tough message. And sometimes I wonder why is the younger generation not more angry? Because let's see what they inherit in a way from our generation. And it doesn't. You asked also what makes people change. It doesn't help to trying to convince them with facts and figures. I think inspiring stories, that helps. Kind of wake-up calls. I remember, I don't remember myself, but I read that in 1968, when people first saw the picture of the blue planet from the sky, from space, it changed their perception that the planet Earth is in fact vulnerable. So pictures, art, is much more important than written text in a way. And I'm a part of a deep worldwide network called Deep Adaptation, and we also talk a lot about this, how to communicate about these messages with people, and that's a key question. And our conclusion so far is, that you have to connect with where people are, their daily lives, and also what they care about. That's the only thing you can do in a way. And I hope it's not all too little too late.
Thank you, Ina. I don't want to ask Jan at this point because he will give his presentation later, but I would like to ask Jan if he wants to ask a question to...
Yeah, thank you, Judith. First of all, thank you all three of you for your presentations, which are very much resonating with my own view and what I will share later this afternoon. But I'm kind of taken by this idea of what Andri sketched, like the generations after us, and in a real life, a person being alive now, having contact with somebody in the year 2160. So if this long time frame and the enormity that is coming our way, you might say. So what I'm thinking about is that Andri and also others talked about the students that we are working with now, and the burden in a way that's on their shoulder. And I think we have this strange phenomenon, as a new cultural phenomenon, that we see adults which are acting childish, like adolescents, on the one hand, and we see children who are prematurely mature, who have this terrible wisdom already on their shoulders at a very young age. And this sort of topples, this turns around the whole cultural scheme where the old people were like, they had the lived experience of a lifetime. The word sagacity, to act with wisdom from the lived experience of a life, which used to be in the hands of the elders. In a situation where now, as you say, the younger people are amidst of this, and which will maybe rightly put the blame on the generation before. So maybe if you could say a bit about what does this say, that we have this strange phenomenon of premature maturity.
I actually wrote 2 children's books about children saving the world, and I'm not sure why that idea came, but that was before Greta came out, and actually we started seeing that on the real scene of politics, where you see like leaders in their 70s saying the most stupid things, being totally ignorant to all the data and the science, while the young Fridays for the Future kids have all the data and everything. But when I talk to younger people, I often tell them that they're not necessarily the most unlucky. That I don't like this feeling of despair, or like I don't. So like when I'm writing my book on time and water, it was not easy to be born at my grandfather's time. When he quit school when he was 10. It was not good to be born in Europe in 1940. So each generation has had has their challenges, and I do not like framing them as the most unlucky generation in history. We do have all the tools. That is, and when people ask what is the solution, should we plant trees or should we create direct air capture? It's both. Should we innovate or should we consume less? It's both. So it's because the issue is so overwhelming, and then I refer to language also. Is that these are totally unprecedented times. That is, we feel like a climate conference is a normal thing. But Genghis Khan, Ramses II, Napoleon, they did not believe they could melt glaciers. So what we're seeing is that we built the infrastructures of our nations, but now we're seeing the fundaments beneath our fundaments are shifting. And I think we never expected that could happen in the calculations, or at least not 50 years ago. So our leaders are mythological characters because they're not discussing trade or war or normal human things. They're discussing glaciers, pH of the oceans, warming of the planet, and 500 years from now, they will be seen in a mythological light. That is, they will be seen as the first humans confronted with consequences like this, and if they are tragic or not, if they did listen to Cassandra or not, the future will decide. But this is an unprecedented situation that these democratically elected leaders are confronted with.
Thank you. Loes, Ina, do you want to respond to?
Yeah, it's kind of going back to what I was, part of me says we need to grow up because I feel like we're placing a lot of responsibility on the next generation. And I think, like I said, the future does not exist. It just doesn't. No one has ever been there. There's no data. The past doesn't exist either. It's based on this, both are based on assumptions. Yes, we have artifacts and stories, etc. But ultimately, it is, I think that to say that, if we're doing this for the future generation, I think it's really important that we stay, that we take the present into consideration, that we grow up and become less of adolescents, and that is really, really difficult. It's really difficult, and it's to say that past generation is their fault. Young people can be angry. That's something that we need to work on. We can't just say, they're going to be mature. They need to solve it. We should act. We should act living by our values in the present. It's the quality of the compost that you leave behind. That's the only real legacy. And I think that is not easy to see. That's not easy to deal with, but I think that is necessary. So yes, education, absolutely. Stories, images, movies, Hollywood narratives. I showed a picture of Wakanda, which is a very different narrative from the future than other stories about Africa from the movie Black Panther. So that's incredibly important. At the same time, we need to do a lot of soul searching ourselves, and that's changing systems that are so deeply rooted, certain narratives, culture and background. That is not easy, but we can't just leave it up to the next generation. It's really up to us.
Thank you, Loes. I have another question because I was. I'm actually responding to what you said about what are we actually saving? Are we saving the planet? And then you said, are we saving our lifestyle? And I think that's, for me, was one of the biggest reasons why I would want to join this group, is because it's about soil, soul, and society, and something is left out, something that is actually, I think, the big elephant in the room. It's namely money and economy that is actually driving, I think, our lives. And so, personally, I have been living a strange life of farming and sort of on very little money and in other parts of the world, and learned that actually you can search for your soul in a very different way. And so I would like to ask you, how do you think we can do this soil and soul searching? Do we frame it as sacrifices, or can we frame it as something else? Yeah, more
briefly, because I've already taken a lot of time. I think we need to reframe the story and the narrative. And I don't see it as sacrificing. I just see it as something new. And because if we continue on the path that we planned, we're going to see it as a side route or a side way, then it feels like a sacrifice. But if we somehow can implement emergence and openness in our decision making in the present, then a new future just pops up. You know, that's all it is. It's just when when we start feeling the effects of climate change, we can say, yeah, we did not plan or prepare for that. No. But what it does, it makes us aware of the assumptions that we had about continuity and discontinuity. And it's an opportunity. This is also an opportunity to be open to new futures but to be open to that emergence. That's something that you need to train. So I think it's important I sometimes quote this, there's a Nigerian proverb that says, unless you teach the lion how to speak, the hunting story will always glorify the hunter. Mm-hmm. And what we often do, we say, okay, well, let's teach the lion how to speak. But it's not about teaching the lion our capability. Mm-hmm. It's about deconstructing the narrative of the hunting story altogether. And I think that's our task.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Andri, do you want to respond? Or?
Yeah, so, I don't really believe it's up to the next generation. I just think the next generation will force the paradigm shift that will make our generation follow. Not because I believe that is how it should be, that's just because I believe that is how it will be. So just like a young woman forced older men not to pinch during the Me Too movement, in the same way, young people will shape our paradigm into what we feel is possible or not. That is, they will create the room of what we will be permitted. They will create the paradigm that we will live within, and so this will eventually. So when I frame this towards young people, when I talk to them, I tell them the rest of my working life, that is until I'm 70, and all of their working life is about this challenge. And I don't really believe that we will have some global mindset. I think this will have to be addressed through all sorts of paradigms and mindsets. So I don't think that we all have to become socialists first, or we all have to believe in some system first before we act. I think it will be a very messy way, but it's inevitable that we have to reach these goals, because it's not an option of not.
Mm-hmm. Ina, do you?
Yeah, and I think it's important not just to adapt or to mitigate climate change, but also to think about what if catastrophe and disaster hits us. How can we still live together, and what does it? And how should we prepare for that in terms of our collaborations or a way of living, but also our relations with others. And this is also reflected in what I call the deep adaptation agenda. And this means that there are three important things to consider here. Resilience, what do we want to keep in the future? Relinquishment, what do we have to let go of? And that might be even more difficult, because living in the Western world, we have to let go of a lot of things: consumerism, hedonism, flying, eating meat. We have to let go of a lot. And the third is restoration. And I think all these three R's, resilience, relinquishment, and restorations, are important.
Thank you. Yeah, it reminds me, the glaciers melting. There was a New York Times article, I think 2 days ago, that showed with sea level rise, which cities will be underwater pretty soon. Most of these cities are not in the Western world, so it's a problem, I think, that, for instance, in the Netherlands, it says that we don't feel climate change yet. But then, we do have, consequences, like we pump gas. I mean, it's all our, dependence on fossil fuel, and it does impact us everywhere. And so here in Groningen, for instance, we have the subsidence of the land and problems with housing. And so I think it is already everywhere. But I think if anyone of you wants to respond to, these disasters happening in mostly developmental countries before it hits the Western world, which is a problem, I think. So how do we, respond to that kind of?
Yeah. Let's. Yes, that's. There's so much to unpack there, and that's obviously it's incredibly complex, because there's. I mean, I do a lot of work, but some of the work that I do takes place in Nigeria and Somalia. And they're really busy building new industries, coming up with new jobs, finding jobs for young people. It's the fastest growing, youngest continent. And in a couple of years, all that younger generation will hit the job market, and there are no jobs. So their approach, in India is a famous example. So the West has been able to develop economically so well, and now, we're about to do that, and now we got to step on the brakes. And they're not, it's an understandable argument. So there's a huge responsibility for us. I mean, and I'm not an expert on this, but I think that we should be very careful in making assumptions about where people's priorities are. And I mentioned the term decolonizing futures. I think we've done a lot of colonizing, and I think we should start talking about futures where everybody belongs, even different perspectives that people that challenge our ideas on climate change. But that's what comes to us. I think we should be very careful about making assumptions where other countries go. Well, how do they suffer, and how we think that they should change or they should be helped. I think that's one of what I was talking about. How we respond to a problem is part of the problem. So I think this is a dangerous trap. Yeah.
Thank you, Loes. Andri, do you want to briefly?
Yeah, well, I think that, of course, I don't think the future will be like a linear. If we look at like Iceland was exporting people around the year 1900. That is, about 20% was moving to Canada because we had reached the limits of growth. But then we tapped into our disadvantages, like geothermal energy and the cold seas were fished. So I believe that we could also have scenarios where, like, you look at the warmest places in the world, they might we could see scenarios where we have developed technology where we turn that into advantages, even though it's strange to say it, but there's lots of energy there that is currently not, it could be harnessed for the benefit of people. So we don't have to see the future as a linear push out of places. Mm-hmm. We could see when we develop solar technology, thermal capturing and turning that into something that we can use to grow or cool or etc. I think that as the faster that this is a very techno-based view. That is because I think we need both. That we need less consumption, but we also need. We can't be without the superpowers that energy has given us. Because we just can't go back to the state of 1900. We're too many and we're too complex. We can't, even though we wish we could go back. So I think that we see places having scenarios like Iceland, places that are pushing people out today with new technology. We will see that they can actually feed people or be habitable because we will have harnessed solar, wind, waves, all these technologies. So not necessarily linearly pessimistic. I think if we start harnessing the powers that we have not harnessed today, we might see unexpected and places that are emerging today. They don't need to go through the phase of coal before they become modern or rich or whatever. I think, and I think we will not miss the old regime. That is just like my friends that have become vegan. It's not like they're crying for hamburgers. They just pretend they're allergic to meat, or they don't have taste for it. Just like we don't miss the times of misogyny, or we don't miss times of slavery. I don't think we will miss. We'll look at the time today. We won't miss it. We will just not. It will not be tasteful to miss it.
Thank you. Ina, do you want to?
Yeah, just to add, I would agree with what Loes and Andri were saying, and I'm involved in a project on resourceful communities, and I think it's very important to see how we can enable communities on the ground, so they become more resourceful. And it's not that we should say what is resourceful, but because they can say that perfectly themselves. But we have to create the conditions for that as policymakers, as scientists, and so on. And I just heard an example from a friend of mine from the US, and they had experienced terrible bushfires. But after that, he saw that the community was so resilient that they were helping each other and became more resourceful and creating all kinds of networks to help each other. And I think that's that's really important. But it also means that in the future, we need more place-based solutions, looking at the characteristics of the place. For example, here in the north of the Netherlands, some innovation and solutions like windmills or hydrogen storage or algae production is much more relevant than in the south of the Netherlands. And Netherlands is a small country. So place-based solutions and place-based approaches are very important, I think, and also place-based institutions. So we can use the capacities and the qualities of a place itself to act upon the future.
Thank you. Yes, we are coming to the end of this seminar, and I have to apologize that we've been waiting for the chat to come through, but we had some technical problems, and so we were unable to get some questions from the audience, but we had an interesting discussion nonetheless. So if you can email everybody. So I would like to give the word to Jan for his last words.
Okay, thank you.
Not for today, but for the seminar.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you for all of you, the three of you who gave your presentations now. I'm just thinking, still pondering a bit on what Andri said about what the things that we won't miss, sort of from the past that have become oblivious. But what comes to my mind is that there is a lot that we are going to miss, like the 130 types of species of plant animals that go extinct each day. And often I wonder if our imagination is not to some extent failing to take this in. That you can say some sensations that we have are too minute, that we don't notice them, that our body, our senses don't register them. But there are other sensations which are too overwhelming, too large. And here I see, we're here at an art academy, Minerva Art Academy, that art in this whole realm of imagination, the story about what's happening, that art can make a tremendous contribution. And I think also, Andri, with your work, you've shown some of the potential that we are just starting to unpack here. So again, with this, I want to thank you for your words and for being present here to this inauguration. And let's see what we can do as a research group in this field. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Andy. I don't have flowers.
Do I get flowers?
So thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you. Wow.
With that, we'll end this part of today's inaugural festivities. But at 4 o'clock, we will join all to hear Jan's inauguration speech. And we're looking forward to that. Thank you.
Dear guests, colleagues, students and family members, thank you for coming or for attending this meeting from home. On behalf of Hanze University of Applied Sciences, I would like to welcome you to the inauguration of Jan van Boeckel as Professor of Art and Sustainability. And a special welcome to Jan's wife, Cecile. Welcome. Jan will be carrying out his research assignment within the Art and Society Research Center. I recently came across a quote by the English writer, poet, painter William Blake. The tree that moves some to tears of joy is in the eyes of others only a green thing that stands in the way. Some see nature all ridicule and deformity, and some scarce see nature at all. But to the eyes of the man of imagination, nature is imagination itself. How often do we cycle straight past a group of old trees? Do we rush our way through a beautiful park? Or do we cross vast meadows in our car, without really paying attention to our surroundings, without the beauty of it striking us, let alone touching us? Our society is digitalizing over the past year in an increasingly rapid pace. We are getting used to daily contact via our screens, and it also offers us new opportunities and possibilities. All the same, I also see around me a need for counterbalance, a need for genuine contact and connection with the people that surround us, with the world around us, with our living environment, with nature. Can art help us to do this, to really connect with the world around us? As Jan himself puts it so nicely, art allows us to approach the world with new eyes. It can help us to sharpen and refine our perception. Especially important in an increasingly virtual society. We are all aware that we are living in a time of major societal challenges, of which the pandemic is currently affecting us all the most, but in which climate change is perhaps one of the most far-reaching and comprehensive. It's a time in which we are increasingly aware of how precious and vulnerable our Earth and nature are, but also how complicated the transition to a sustainable society is, and how many different interests, perspectives and opinions are involved. It's so important to be able to look at this with a sharp and sophisticated look. And can art play a role here? When we were getting to know each other, Jan told me about the example of the High Line in New York. A park has been built on this repurposed railway line, more than 2 kilometers long. It was designed by Piet Oudolf, a Dutch garden and landscape designer. Or perhaps it would be more accurate to say garden artist. He used native trees, grasses and plants in his design. This is a place that contributes to the biodiversity of the surrounding area. A place that not only offers New York residents a green oasis, where they can catch their breath, but where they can also experience the beauty, colors and sense of nature. A tangible example that art can really add something meaningful. Sustainability and art, an unexpected combination for many of us, and a relatively new field of research in the Netherlands. It offers a new perspective, a refreshing look at a much discussed topic, a topic to which we often adopt a practical approach with a focus on concrete solutions and applications, a process in which we may overlook the personal and cultural implications of climate change. I will leave it to Jan to tell us more about what he is focusing on in his research and how he's tackling this. However, I would like to say something about the importance of this professorship for our University of Applied Science and our environment. This starts with our vision and social mission. We are an engaged university. Together with our students, staff and partners, we are working together on innovation and a viable future, all based on the same motivation and ideals. We want to contribute to the world around us. Not without good reason. For more than 10 years now, our motto has been, share your talent, move the world. When we look at the developments in the world around us, we see it as our social mission to work on strengthening a livable and sustainable Northern Netherlands and working towards sustainability with and for everyone. In order to carry out this task, we connect education, research and professional practice in so-called living labs, in which students, researchers and experts from the professional field from different disciplines collaborate on the real-life assignments of companies, institutions and governments. The complex societal issues of today and tomorrow call for multidisciplinary cooperation, in which we look at an issue and possible solution from multiple perspectives. Professors play an important role here. They ensure connection with the professional field, with education and with other disciplines, so that we can work together to respond to societal issues. There can be no doubt that Jan van Boeckel's professorship and research make an important contribution to our social mission, to work towards a livable and sustainable society. What makes his professorship and approach so special is primarily the combination of art and sustainability, by means of which he approaches the challenges of climate change from a completely new perspective, always based on the question what art can contribute to the conversation. In addition, the connection with education and the practical field is explicitly reflected in the collaboration in the Climate Adaptation Living Lab, with aims to make the city of Groningen more sustainable, and in which various different disciplines work together, such as art, design, technology and architecture. Or the Circular Design Factory Living Lab, which examines the application of renewable raw materials in designs. This relatively new research domain will provide important input for our education and curricula. For example, we will be able to train artists who, based on their talent, expertise and creativity, can make an important contribution to the social debate on sustainability and energy transition. Dear Jan, you have been on a special and inspiring journey before joining us. You were educated as a cultural anthropologist, after which you gradually became increasingly interested in research at the intersection between art and sustainability. You have worked and lived in Finland, Iceland, Sweden and Estonia, a wonderful career that has always been largely determined by the people you have met and worked with. This is also how your path crossed that of Minerva and the Hanze University of Applied Science. And your expertise and background tie in so well with what we are doing and our ambition for the years to come. I am convinced that this is also what you can bring us as a professor, with your background and expertise. learning to be open to unexpected twists and connections, learning to use our senses, and to be stimulated and touched. So that we don't see that tree as a green thing that stands in our way, but take the time to stand still and really look at it, appreciate it, so that we can move forward together towards a sustainable society. I wish you the very best of luck in your research program.
Ja, we zijn hier bij de Eco-kathedraal, dat is in Friesland, in de buurt van het plaatsje Meulen. En een architect, kunstenaar, Louis Leroy, heeft dit opgebouwd. Je begint te bouwen met stenen en er gebeurt er iets onverwachts. De natuur gaat een dialoog met je aan. En kunst is eigenlijk denk ik, telkens het zoeken van die dialoog, die ontmoeting met de wereld, zonder dat je dat te veel probeert te sturen. Want vandaag gaan we een workshop doen met klei, op dezezelfde plek.
Dit werk is gebaseerd op een wetenschappelijk artikel dat ik las over insectensterfte. En ik ben naar 63 plekken in Duitsland geweest om die vliegbewegingen van insecten te onderzoeken. Ik teken nu een lijn met pastelpotlood. En waar de lijn dikker is, daar is het insect dichter bij ons. En waar de lijn straks dunner wordt, daar gaat hij verder van ons af.
In mijn lectoraat wil ik eigenlijk op 3 terreinen onderzoek doen. Soil, Soul en Society. Soil, dat heeft te maken met de bodem, de grond. Waar komt het voedsel vandaan? Waar komt het leven vandaan? Soul gaat over onderzoek naar wat betekent het om je rekenschap te geven van deze tijd met de grote bedreigingen die op ons afkomen, waar we eigenlijk al middenin zitten, de klimaatverandering. En wat kan kunst toevoegen aan onze reflecties daarover? Waar kunnen we toch nog, ondanks alles, die hoop in vinden? De laatste is Society. Van hoe gaan we dan het gesprek aan met de ander, met de samenleving?
Voor Jan en het lectoraat ga ik onderzoek doen, een PhD-traject. Verder zal ik hem assisteren in zijn onderzoekstrajecten en in een later stadium onderwijs geven bij Minerva.
Ik ben bioloog op het Arctisch Centrum en ik ga al 30 jaar lang naar Spitsbergen toe, iedere zomer, om daar brandganzen te bestuderen. Het is op het moment zo dat we over die 30 jaar al praten over 4, 5 graden temperatuurverhoging.
In het lectoraat werken we ook samen met biologen, met psychologen, filosofen. Omdat we elkaar nodig hebben, elkaar kunnen versterken.
Ik vind het ontzettend belangrijk dat ik erover vertel. Gewoon dat wat ik daar zie gebeuren, dat ik dat uitdraag. Maar het is nog mooier dat ik de kans heb om met professionals te werken die dat nog beter kunnen uitdragen. En een heel mooi voorbeeld daarvan is Hanze UAS. Over wat het doet als je in dat poolgebied bent. En hoe je in het leven staat als je dat werkelijk een keer overdacht hebt.
Nou, mijn werk gaat vaak over het proberen te begrijpen van een niet-menselijk perspectief. Dus dat kunnen zijn insecten, maar ook de aarde of een boom of dingen die heel dichtbij zijn, maar die je door mijn werk misschien anders gaat bekijken en ook er meer een connectie mee krijgt.
Die kunstenaars die bieden een blik op het gebied waarin ik zelf opereer, die ik zelf nog niet eens kan genereren. Bijvoorbeeld Hanze UAS, die geeft woorden aan gevoelens die ik zelf heb en die ik eigenlijk nog niet kan verwoorden. Ik vertel graag over de vogels, maar hij vertelt over de emoties, de diepe emoties die in ons opborrelen, ook in mij.
Kunst wordt vaak eigenlijk gezien als een manier om dingen te illustreren. Maar kunst kan ook vanuit die eigen positie, vanuit het eigen denkkracht, originaliteit, improvisatie, iets toevoegen in een situatie waar we eigenlijk geen antwoorden meer hebben. We moeten op een nieuwe manier gaan denken, een nieuwe manier gaan voelen, ons tot de wereld verhouden. En kunst kan daar veel meer betekenen dan wat we tot nu toe zien. Yes, I opened my presentation with this artwork of Ilka Halso and music of Arvo Pärt. I'll come back to why I chose this opening. But first, I would like to take you on a journey that takes you back about 5 centuries, to this artwork made by Jeroen Bos, Dutch artist. And it has this curious title, "The field has eyes, the forest has ears." And it shows a bit our entanglement, our intertwinement with the non-human world, the more than human world, how close it still was at the time. And then when I flash forward very quickly from this way of relating to the world to maybe our predicament, our situation now, captured by this cartoon of the Titanic sinking, but before this major emergency is happening, we still make a film of it to share with others. So this is the context in which I start working now in this research group on art and sustainability. And in the program I'm developing called Earthbound, I'm very much inspired by the work of Satish Kumar. He's the one who established Schumacher College, an international college for holistic science and ecological studies. And he talks about soil, soul and society as a new trinity for our time. So usually we relate sustainability to the 3 pillars of economy, ecology and society. And it translates to people, planet, profit. But here he comes with a new trinity which foregrounds the soil, soul and society. And for me, I think I'm very grateful to have a possibility now at this point in my life to work at a place where I can combine these dimensions of art and sustainability from such a more inclusive perspective. Special about Satish is that he has this expanded notion of sustainability, which also opens up for a cultural dimension of sustainability and an inner dimension, that it's also about our inner life. So the research program we are developing is called Earthbound, and we are trying to see how we can translate this into research activities. One would be focused on landscapes of the mind, gardens of the mind, healing gardens. I'll talk more about this in a minute. Another dimension is the climate existence, the existential questions drawn forth by the climate crisis. And the third is what possibilities, strategies to work our way out of it or to address it, where I look at transition and sustainist design. But I like to start first and foremost with art and the power of art in relating to the world. I think this is captured very well by Rebecca Solnit when she said that the job of artists is to invite in the unforeseen, to work with the unknown. It is this imaginative responsibility to be able to face paradoxes, uncertainty, and also that you resist clinging to binary oppositions, that you do either this or that, but that you take a bit more time maybe to work also in the in-between space. It's also an idea of art as a way of building connectivity, building community. In my work, I did my research at Aalto University in Helsinki, my doctoral research. And often I foregrounded working with the body, the embodied experience of the world. Like you see here some examples of meeting, for example, a tree and making a painting together with a tree. It's very much about relating to the world through our senses. And it's, I think, interesting to notice that the word aesthetics, the Greek origin of it, refers to approaching the world, relating to the world through the senses. Some of this comes across in this notion of anesthetics, what you go through when you get an operation, then your senses are numbed, they are cut out, so that you don't feel what's happening. So the aesthetic experience is very much about relating actively to the world. And I think it's an interesting supposition to think of our ecological crisis as maybe first and foremost an aesthetic crisis. So I start this journey of Earthbound in looking at these 3 dimensions, and the first one is the ground that we're standing on, the soil. Soil is the source of life. Soil sustains the entire life system, and it refers to the interdependence of living creatures, the interdependency. And in my talk, when I use the word soil, it's also very often is equated or the same as the natural world. A bit about where we find ourselves. One of the news reports that we get in is, for example, that in the last 3 decades, 3/4 of the flying insects in Germany have disappeared in just 30 years. And we get news, for example, of what's happening in Australia in the last summer into the winter. That 3 million animals have been either killed or displaced. And there's a list of them, the birds, the frogs, and so on. These are enormous changes that are happening in our world, in our lifetime, at this very moment. And I think from ecology, there's a very important concept here that is called shifting baseline, and that refers to that over time the knowledge is lost about the state of the natural world. So each new generation starts at a new point. The baseline is shifting, and what we are witnessing is a kind of generational amnesia, forgetting how rich nature was before, starting with a new normal, if you will. So when I was doing my doctoral research at Aalto University, I would often stroll from my house to the university. The university is behind these trees, and I would come across these community gardens, these vegetable gardens made by neighbors in the area, which both was producing food, but also a place of rest, a place to cool down, to relax. And I was touched by the quality of it, the aesthetics, but also this idea of a sense of ownership, that you care for as a community for the place where you find yourself at. And for me, it is an interesting example of how ecology and aesthetics can intertwine. Artistic practice can be about many things, but one of the things it can be about is about creating beauty in our world. Beauty is more than just the picturesque, just the pretty. It's a profound way of relating to something that is meaningful, and it has a relation to our well-being. I'll say more about this. Piet Oudolf, Annemarie Hannink already referred to him, the garden designer. He has this idea that a gardener listens to what a place asks for, and a gardener becomes aligned in a way with it. The garden is a smellscape, it is a soundscape, it is a garden also of the mind. And Piet Oudolf stressed that that in a garden you can also witness the cycle of life, birth, living and death. Even if a garden is decomposing, there's still something interesting, meaningful to attend to. And here is the High Line, already mentioned, this old railway track of 2.5 kilometers coming into New York. This is how it looked before 2009. Then Piet Oudolf, with his project, developed it into this green oasis, this green space, where also the nature is showing itself in an interesting way all year through. And it is embraced now by the people who live in New York. Piet Oudolf also said that if you just design gardens from a purely functional basis, you're not going to achieve sustainability because you're not addressing human needs. Such initiative is doomed in the long run, he said. Which brings me to this dimension of soul. And it is maybe interesting to notice that there is this notion of biophilia, Latin word, which means bio-life, philia, the love of. So the love of life seems to be very central to our human existence, that maybe because of a major part of the time that we have been on this earth, we have been in green environments, so it feels quite natural, quite in its place to feel an attachment to nature. And important to this dimension of soul is looking at sustainability as living sustainable from the inside out, from the inner life as well. If you, an example of this is if you, research has found that if you're in a hospital bed and you have the possibility of looking out at a window to a natural environment like this, that in general after operation you leave the hospital 1 or 2 days before somebody who's just looking at the blind wall. So this power of nature in our lives is really profound and works in many different ways. It also means that if we are, for example, stressed and we come in nature, that we have our attention restored. There's this attention restoration theory. And one of the stories that moved me a lot is the story of Johan Ottosson, a man from Sweden who was hit by a car when he was cycling to work in 1991. He had severe head and brain injuries. and he needed to go through a long period of recovery. And from the hospital, he would walk into the area and come to a place like this and sit next to a stone, a boulder like this. And he said that tears can fall on the warm stone and evaporate there. So the fact that the stone was not moving, was stable, was for him comforting. And for him, the most complex relationships to retrieve again was to other people. So slowly, starting from the stones, going to the trees, to the plants, to animals, he built his way up back again to the human society. And this is again an example of the relationship between inner and outer sustainability. Johan Ottesen, together with Patrick Alnarp and others, developed these rehabilitation gardens, of which Alnarp is an example, of the Swedish Agricultural University. And in it, they try to address the different needs, the different aspects of a garden that can be comforting to humans. So if you're stressed out, if you have a burnout, or if you are in a depression, it can be soothing, it can be calming. If you sit there and you just feel the wind on your skin, or you hear very little sounds, or you sit next to the water, or if you work with your hands in the earth, if you grow food, and just to sit on this bench, for example, and to be under this shadow of the wall, it's like the whole sensory universe, the sensorium, is being addressed, and it can calm the person down and help him or her to find balance. And to me, from an artistic perspective, next to the therapeutic parts, there's a whole area to be explored here, how art, how aesthetics can add to explore the enhancement, to expand these green spaces. One of the things they developed in Alnarp in 2016 is this place of working with newcomers, people who have fled from war and persecution in other countries, so that they could find some balance, some new start in Sweden. And the results are very promising. They had more, they found it easier to learn the language. They felt more calm generally in the garden. And they also felt happier. So it was very meaningful and impactful on their health and general sense of well-being. Just one example of the potential of such healing gardens. But then, in our ecological crisis and the news that comes our way of how bad the situation is, for example, that every day 130 species of plants or animals disappear from the face of the earth, it's very hard to take this in. We easily get, for good reasons, into some kind of existential fear, some kind of feeling of despair. A word for this is eco-anxiety or climate grief. It's the shadow, if you will, of our present existence. Aldo Leopold, an American ecologist, said, if you are an ecologist and you are sensitive to this, you are aware of this, you must harden your shell, and because you see things happening maybe a little bit before other people. And he says, basically that means living alone in a world of wounds. What happens if you put a curtain or a blanket across your sensory organs is that you cut out, you numb yourself to information that is too threatening, too overwhelming. The psychoanalyst René Letzman says that actually maybe doing this, to numb yourself, this psychic numbing, can be also looked at as in a different way. She quotes a writer who says that apathy can be like a miracle of protection, remarkably, because it's a place where you can rest before we can do something else, something new. It's a place where we can work through our environmental melancholia. So, as we try to do something about the climate crisis, and we get, for example, instructions like this is from an EU campaign in 2006, which gives the idea that you control climate change. It's very much about your individual responsibility. Turn down, switch off, recycle, etc. And it gives this sense of control, that you're in command, that you have mastery over the situation. It's like a moral instruction. Then Arne Næss, the Norwegian philosopher who coined the term deep ecology, said, maybe when we care about the environment, we should work in another way, not by raising the finger, telling other people you should do this, you should not do that, but work in a completely different way and work with what he called beautiful acts. A beautiful act is that you do something not because anybody says that you should do so. It's not that you reluctantly, with hesitation, do what is needed, but that you do it from an inner voice, something inside, your inclination says you that this is the right thing to do. A simple example of this is if you're camping in a wilderness area like this, and you maybe make some fire to heat the food, or you have some rubbish, then it feels quite natural for most people to clean up your own rubbish. You don't need a sign, a moral instruction telling you, please clean up after you. So Arne Næss is saying maybe we need to nourish more of these beautiful acts, and he got this notion from Immanuel Kant. Which leads me to the level of society, the third and last one. And again, with the focus on art, what art can do here. So moving from the soil, from the ground where we get our food, to how we keep balance in our soul, in our inner life. So how do we act in social relationships at the level of society? And here I look at, for example, the work of Deep Adaptation. It's a group which says that social collapse is already inevitable, they say, during our lifetime. Or a group like Dark Mountain, which says that what we are going through now with, for example, the climate crisis, or the larger ecological crisis, is so great, so enormous, that they say it might lead to the end of the world. But they say the end of the world as we know it is not the end of the world full stop. And they also add to this that the roots of the crisis that we're going through is that we are maybe telling ourselves the wrong stories, that the stories that we can go on perpetually with the idea of progress. Maybe we have to think about the stories that are meaningful to us in a completely different way. And we should have maybe the courage to be with someone also who thinks different. And this is the other aspect of society. How do we engage in conversations with people who do not necessarily agree with us? And I think art can also contribute there to open up the way we engage in communication and conversation. And also if we challenge people's assumptions about the future and what the likely future is that we want to move forward to. So zooming in a bit on art and what art can add to the conversation here. The Finnish artist Osmo Rauhala said that art is one of man's antennae stretched out to sense the world, to make sense in a way of the world, trying to grasp it. There is in art the continuous debate between art for its own sake, art for art's sake, that art is an autonomous activity, that you should not harness it for something else. There's the quote of Arnold Schoenberg who said that nothing done for a purpose could be called art. This is one side, that you stay away from any instrumentalization. The other side is that people say that artists have a special responsibility as anybody to, in this time of great crisis, to be very active, to work for change. And I think with our research group, we try to find our way somewhere between these poles and to see in the middle ground again what is possible. I think a very nice quote of art, what the task of art is, comes from Guillermo Gomez Peña, who said, "The task of artists is to keep the wound open, to make it hurt a bit, and not to heal it." So in addressing the challenges of our time, and we look, for example, at design, we can be inspired, for example, I think, by sustainist design, developed by Michael Schwartz and Diana Krabbendam, which foregrounds sharing, localism, connectedness, proportionality, what is appropriate, creating a new agenda for social design, so design that is directly considering what the impact is in society and with society. Another approach is of transition design, for example, Terry Irwin and Gideon Kossoff and others. She has been at Hanze University before, this is 2009, and on the screen you see the word wicked problems. One of the things that she foregrounds. What she says about wicked problems is that what the problem is with a wicked problem is that they are interconnected. You cannot solve a wicked problem by the same strategies of knowing that resulted in them. So you have to think in a new way. If you try to solve one wicked problem isolated, it might pop up somewhere else. An example of a wicked problem is air conditioners in a household. For example, if we get more warmer summers, we might buy an air conditioner to cool off the house, but the energy needed to feed the air conditioner in itself has an impact on the climate, which makes it warmer, which will lead to more air conditioners. So it's like a snake biting its own tail. So what Terry and others in the Transition Design Institute do is, for example, what they did with the COVID crisis, they started to make these types of analysis to track and analyze the spread of and response to the pandemic in the US. And they there take 3 steps. One is by a mapping of the problem, zooming in on the problems and seeing all the links, which is about the present. The second is to see the problem's evolution. So how did it come about? It is not just popping up out of nothing. So looking at the past. And then the visioning to the future. How do we move from understanding all these interrelationships? How do we move to the future? This, I think, ties in a very nice way to the idea of Tim Ingold, who was once asked to speak about sustainability. And Tim Ingold said, well, is there anything that we could exclude from the transition to sustainability? Maybe we should speak about the sustainability of everything. So important in transition design is that they look at the system, at the change of systems of entire societies. Entire societies must transition. Nothing, in a way, can be left out of it in face of the big changes we are facing. So these are the 3 dimensions that we in our research group would like to take up. And I want to zoom in particularly on one aspect that I find important and very relevant for art, which I have termed mindful schizophrenia, which is not cognitive dissociation. It's not that you know something, for example, how serious the climate crisis is, but you act in a different way as if you don't know. Mindful schizophrenia is bringing the practice of mindfulness, of deliberately bringing one's attention to the present moment without judgment, to a situation that is fundamentally split. Then I don't look at the clinical understanding of schizophrenia, but more the old Greek root, which is to live with a split mind. An example of this is how to cope with the feeling of guilt and shame of inevitably having some kind of carbon footprint. I mean, being alive today makes it very hard not to have some kind of ecological impact. So how do you cope with that, being split in that way? Another way of living in mindful schizophrenia is how to retain a belief that life can still have meaning and at the same time still be able to make a decision of, for example, to have children if the world is indeed falling to pieces. So the ability to face paradox, to cope with confusion and uncertainty, I think is becoming more and more a 21st century skill. It has survival value. It is the courage to keep loving what you love, even though you have this understanding that the crisis is indeed a climate or an ecological emergency. Estonian componist Arvo Pärt, I started with his music, himself went also, like John Otterson, who was hit by the car. Arvo Pärt went through a personal crisis that he couldn't make music for several years. And then he came back with a new style, which he called Tintin Nabuli. It's the 2 connected voices that he puts in his music, in this new style. One is a melodic voice. It's about the daily life of sin and suffering. And the other voice, the other line in the music, is the voice of forgiveness, of morals and consciousness. So he brings together the sin and also the forgiveness of the sin. And he comes up with, in this context, of concepts like joyful sorrow or bright sadness, which sounds like paradoxes or contradictions. And then there's this idea that grave may engender something creative, beautiful, bearing traces of the sorrow whence it came. So that still the sorrow feeds the beauty in a way. What I show here is a short excerpt of an interview done by Icelandic artist Björk with Arvo Pärt, where he talks about these 2 lines in his music.
There is question and answer, the different voices inside your music. It's almost like Pinocchio and the little cricket. So one is like human and always doing mistake or pain or making pain to other, and the little cricket is more like comfort him or tell him, you know, do you feel it is inside your music, or maybe I imagine?
I'm very happy about that you talk about it. It's really so. And this new style, it consists two ways, two sides. So that one line is my sins, and another line is forgiveness to these sins. Mostly the music has two voices. One is more complicated and subjective, but another is very simple, clear and objective. But Pinocchio is a good thing.
Yeah, so what I think Arvopath beautifully illustrates here is this ability to live with these two voices simultaneously. So to be conscious of one's sins, of the difficulty of the sins, but also to allow for forgiveness, not sweeping under the carpet that we have this impact of sin, of impacting, for example, on the climate, but also accepting that we can find some kind of meaning in this situation. So an example of this to me that came across recently is this artwork by Tawana Miller Johnson. She's a Mohawk from Kahnawake territory along the St. Lawrence River in Canada. She was part of a project called Breathe, and she made this mask together with other indigenous and non-indigenous artists. She calls this Corona COVID, and it is, of course, the beak of the plague doctors which went around in the 17th century to deal with another big plague we had at that time. That was the Black Death. And at that time they believed that if they could put herbal spices in this big beak, like cinnamon and peppermint, that they could in a way evade being affected by the bubonic plague. It didn't help. But for her, this is also with the relationship with the animals in the other species relevant in her culture. For example, the crow that is on the top of the head. It is a way of finding comfort and compassion in this time. And I quote her that she says, I like how my mask has a darkness to it, sprinkled with beauty, just like the time we are now in, surrounded by so much darkness, like death and sickness, yet you yourself are around things that have beauty. It's a way of finding kindness and generosity. So it is this aspect of finding beauty and allowing also to experience or to be in a situation with darkness and sadness. An artwork in a way that provides comforting, but also has these other layers, other dimensions. And maybe it's interesting to mention in this regard that there is a relationship between inspiration, to breathe, and breathing. I'm about to close. There's another example of two voices of Joanna Macy. She has worked a lot with what she calls the work that reconnects. She does workshops for people who have hit the wall. And she says for her there are also two voices, that on one level she's helping people to be better activists, more resilient, more creative, responsible, effective. But on another level, a more ultimate level, she says, she's doing it so when things are starting to fall apart, we won't turn on each other. So part of it is trying to coach people to still hold ground, but also another part, another voice is telling her, if it goes wrong, how do we still look after each other? This is part of a short interview with her.
I wish that I could tell people that it's going to be all right if they do this. But then I can't, of course. And then I think to myself, if I could, I imagine if I could give a pill to you and then you'd suddenly say, oh, it's going to be all right. Everything's going to be fine. Would that really draw forth from you the full creativity and courage of which you are capable? Would it? No. So it's that knife edge of uncertainty that keeps us awake.
So this idea that this knife edge of uncertainty keeps us awake, that is also that we can bring out our potential in facing this crisis. So in the end, this is my last slide. I want to give you a thought of Gregory Bateson, a philosopher, ecologist, biologist, psychologist, who studied a phenomenon called the double bind. A double bind is that you're in an impossible situation. You cannot, if you do this, it doesn't work out. If you do something else, it doesn't work out. You cannot run away from it. To illustrate what a double bind is, he said, think of a Zen master who has a stick in his hand. And he has the stick in front of you, in front of the pupil in Zen practice. And then the master says, if you say that I have a stick in my hand, I will hit you. If you say that I don't have a stick in my hand, I will hit you too. And then if you don't say anything, I will also hit you. So you're completely tied, you're completely in a double bind. There's nothing really from a viewpoint of logic that you can do to come out of this. So maybe the only thing that the pupil can do is grab the stick from the hand of the teacher. And maybe the teacher will accept this as an appropriate response. And for Bateson, this idea of dealing with a double bind, working your way through it, jumping a level, that you do something outside of logic, makes that you can loosen yourself or address this double bind. And it is actually working out double binds, finding your way through it, is an evolutionary principle that motivates evolution, that if you're stuck, to find your way out of it. If this doesn't work and that doesn't work, something else needs to be improvised. And improvised is, I think, to the key, to the heart of what art is about. And also, I think, what our work in the project Earthbound will be about, to find a way to grasp the stick. So, with that, this is the traditional line of with which presentations end at Hanze University. No sooner said than done. I would like to add also that reflect before you act. So we need to come to action, but we also need to be very careful that we don't repeat the mistakes that have brought us in the mess we find ourselves in. Thank you.
That brings us to a difficult part of the inauguration. I need some help. Cecile, may I invite you to help us? Thank you, Cecile. Jan, from now on you're Professor Art and Sustainability at the Hanze University of Applied Science, and I wish you and your research group a lot of success.
Thank you.
My name is Dorothea van der Meulen. I'm the Dean of Minerva Art Academy. This has been a marvelous afternoon, and first my congratulations, Jan, because you're now a professor. The apple does not fall far from the tree. 100 years ago, Minerva painting teacher Bach set out with his students on a bicycle tour along the Rijdiep Trail, past the towns and villages of North Groningen, painting easels stepped on their bike racks. Along the way, he held classes on plein air, wild painting, as Jan would call it. Their subjects were churches, dikes, turbs, and local inhabitants. Accuracy and color were less important than personal sensory perceptions and expressions. The object was to capture the extraordinary of the commonplace, to tell a story of Groningen's outlying region, its Ommeland. This constituted a radical break with prevailing notions about painting. Bach's great role model was Vincent van Gogh. He may well have been inspired by the retrospective of of Van Gogh's work held in 1898 in this building, which was then still called the Groningen Museum. Bach's stimulating method training has made a number of exceptional painters who would go to form artist collective De Ploeg. De Ploeg was established in 1918 by a group of young artists who were in search of renewal. Even today, their prints and paintings pulse with the energy they use to depict landscapes and people. The Next Call, an international network. With the publication in The Next Call in 1923, 100 years ago, printed on Werkman's manual press, De Ploeg sought to connect with a wider European network of pioneering artists. In pamphlets, they allied themselves with Berlin, Moscow and Paris and called for a break with the conventions of the artist and the citizen as free thinkers. Why I'm telling this story about Minerva 100 years ago? The apple does not fall far from the tree. Painting in the outdoors has also been a source of inspiration for Jan, who has been teaching courses in wild painting for some years. In his lecturate, Jan spoke about the significance of the soil, soul and society. It reads like a pamphlet, a next call. How can the arts open up us to connect with the world through senses, through our senses, to become earthly? How can we engage a dialogue with the world and with these sensory experiences? Through art, we can approach the world with fresh eyes. This lecturate offers an inspiring starting point for researchers and artists. It's no surprise that this afternoon International Symposium is so well attended. We find ourselves in a transition to a sustainable society. That society will demand resiliency to cope with the changes, uncertainties, oppositions and dissenters that cross our path. Art can give us a different mental frame and visual vocabulary, and these are the antennas that enable humans to feel and to visualize that what's happening in the world. The need to directly connect with our surroundings and nature and to express the urgency of climate change by and through the arts are precisely what make research in the art and sustainability professorship so valuable and vital. This research is its scope and purpose in connecting Groningen with artists and researchers in Minerva, of course, the Research Center Art and Society, and the Research Center Built Environment, but also in Iceland, in Scandinavia, and all over the world. The apple does not fall far from the tree. 100 years ago, members of the Ploeg would gather in the Red Hell, as they call it, a space in the city Lage der A, with a view of the Martini Tower, where they discuss art and contributions, and of course enjoying glasses of Groningen's own Hooghout gin. Today we shared information and ideas through our digital platform. This afternoon has made me even more aware of the vital need to continue developing this new research area of the coming years. Jan, I hope that at this time next year we'll once more be able to welcome researchers, artists, designers and students in person in this historical building. To share research results here in the Groene Zaal, but also to open an exhibition, beautiful acts in the Koepelzaal, with works with artists and designers exploring art and sustainability. And together afterwards for drinks and bitterballen in our local, the Kale Jonker. Back to now, Jan. Today it was a big day. You and Cecile are returning to Amsterdam. Of course, we can't let you go empty-handed. We are pleased to present you with a gift from the Hanze University, with Laura Lasek, and a gift from a Minerva alumnus and a former colleague, Tijmen van Dijk. Laura, that's the present, but I tell some more about the present. Laura collects images and stories and often uses this material to compose constructed visual stories. In 2018, she was graduated here, Fine Arts. This work, Aether, it is called, is a series of 20 photos. The work is based on the 4 elements: water, earth, air, and fire. By combining substances that come from the 4 elements, example salt and water, reacts with a micro camera. She makes some visible what you cannot see with the eyes, but it's beautiful, Jan. The another present is the present from Tijmen, and it shows the Olde Grieze, our old grey round the Martini Tower, the symbol of our city and region captured in a unique photograph, an image of the Martini Tower resonating in a rain puddle as an embodiment of unexpected connection. So, the present, Jan, I cannot give it to you, but you can take it.
Thank you.
And of course, a lot of success with your lectorate, Jan. Oh, wow. Almost, yeah. Oh.
So.
That's loud. Nice. And now I give you this. Yeah, you know kind of.
Thank you so much, Dorothea.
Okay. And the flowers, Cecile, is for you. To bring back to Amsterdam. Okay, Jan, I give you the word.
Thank you, Dorothea, for the presence. And thank you to the Minerva Art Academy for receiving me here, and to the Hanze University in general for allowing me to be professor in art and sustainability. For me, it has been a very special day from the start of the seminar with Andri Snær Magnason from Iceland and Loes Damhof and Ina Horlings in our seminar, looking at how we can take this issue into academia, how we can work with this art and sustainability issues in the face of the huge challenges that we are facing. So thank you for contributing to it. Thank you to the colleagues, the people who made this possible, this event, and the other people in our research center, and to the technicians who helped producing this event. And of course, thank you Annemarie Hannink and the executive board for organizing this event and welcoming me to the academic community here. And last but not least, all the people attending to the event from their homes. I'm very glad that you made the effort, that you were present here with us in these extraordinary circumstances. And maybe hopefully, as Dorothea indicated, in a year from now we can do it a bit different. And thank you all for joining us here.